Okay, looks like we have a pretty good sized group, so I'm going to get started. Again, for those who just joined, today we're going through a Going Beyond Best Practices session that focuses on banking and reconciliation in QuickBooks Online, and I'm Valerie Heckman. And I am a senior product consultant with Intuit Small Business Group. I work in our accountant segment. I've been with Intuit for 6 years. I'm a certified pro advisor in QuickBooks Online. I'm located in Naperville, Illinois, and my role at Intuit is really around educating bookkeeping and accounting firms as they move to the cloud and become a firm of the future. So maybe you've been on other sessions with me before. And if you'd like, you can follow me on Twitter at @VHeckman. I only tweet about QuickBooks, really, so you can go there and see some shared articles and updates and that kind of thing. Okay, here's my agenda for today. So we're going to do a little bit of an overview, talk about workflow and banking, and then actually deep dive into bank feeds. So I'll be mostly live in the product. We'll talk through connecting a bank account, matching and adding transactions, as well as transferring if that's necessary, how to create bank rules, and then once we've gone through the bank feed, I'll pop into reconciliation, and we'll go through those steps and the bank reconciliation reports and resolving discrepancies as well. So those are the topics I plan to cover today. Before I get going, I do want to just launch a poll. Today's session isn't for CPE or anything, but I did want to ask a poll question just to get a sense of who's here. And my first question is if you have used the bank feeds in QuickBooks Online. So I'm going to launch that poll. You want to let me know just so I get an idea of who's in the audience. And we'll give that a moment here. Okay, looks like most of you have voted. I'll give it just another couple of seconds. So as a bit of a housekeeping, while we're on this, there's the polls that you can answer. This is really the main question I'll ask. I'll ask another one at the end. And then there's a question box. So if you do have questions for me throughout the session, I will be addressing those as I go along. Okay, I'm going to close out the poll. Most of you voted, so thank you for that. So it looks like we are split almost in thirds. So about a third of you are experts that are just here for some extra tips. 40% of you are proficient, are using it but not proficient in using it yet, and then the rest of you are new to QuickBooks Online. So that is good to know, and thank you so much for answering that. So I will try and cater to our beginners or those who are maybe just getting comfortable now, and then hopefully some of the experts will pick up some tips along the way. And then when we get into reconciliation, I'm not going to ask a poll around that, but some of you might be newer to that as well because we have made some changes over the last 6 months or so in Reconcile. All right, so the idea is that we connect up bank and credit card accounts to QuickBooks, and I'm going to refer to bank and credit cards as just bank accounts, just so that I don't have to say that whole phrase over and over again today. And the idea here is to use the bank feeds to reduce data entry and keep the books up to date. The idea is to be able to look at QuickBooks and not have to wait and kind of be a historian, to actually get the transaction data in as quickly as it's happening if possible, and then be able to view your account balances on the QBO dashboard. So if you're working in a client's file, you'll see the balance of the bank versus what's in QuickBooks and how many transactions are sitting there waiting for you to review. And we'll talk through that process in a lot of detail. We connect with over 16,000 financial institutions in the U.S. There's also options to connect to global banks if you have clients that are using multi-currency. And you update the accounts to pull transactions into QuickBooks. And we're going to talk through the 2 different ways that you can get the bank account transactions in. The first is the most common, to connect up the online banking to QuickBooks Online, and we'll talk through those steps. The other option is to do a file upload. You can upload a file if your bank doesn't have a connection or you need a specific period of time, etc. And we'll look at what both of those are like as we're going through. And then once we get the transactions into QuickBooks, the auto categorization is going to learn from you over time, or you can set up custom rules to really fine-tune how QuickBooks addresses those transactions as they come in. And then once you review them, the bank transactions are ready for reconciliation. So let's look at this as kind of a workflow step-by-step, just so everyone's on the same page of how this goes. So once we've connected up the bank account, the bank transactions post at the bank's website, and QuickBooks Online will scrape them from the website. And we're not going to pull in anything that's pending, just things that have posted. And then the bank feed updates in QuickBooks Online, And you can click the update button to get it to cycle through and find new transactions. So if it tells you it hasn't pulled anything new in for like 4 days, you can cycle through and update. And there's also that option to do a file upload if that's applicable. And again, we'll talk about that in more depth a little later on. But we get those transactions into QuickBooks, and now they're ready to review and accept. So QBO is going to look at those transactions, see if it finds a match. If it doesn't find a match, it looks to see if you have any custom rules that you set up. And if it doesn't find a match or a rule, it makes some assumptions based on what you've done in the past. So if I told it that Starbucks is a travel meal, the next time a transaction comes through from Starbucks, it's going to make that travel meal as a suggested category. And it'll also look at transfers as well and identify those. So transfers could be money moving from one bank account, like a checking account, to a savings account, so transfer in that way. But it can also mean a credit card payment where we're transferring money from, say, a checking account to pay off a credit card. And we'll go through an example of that as well. And then accepting the transactions into QuickBooks. So this is where you come in. So up until this point, we haven't done anything with these transactions. They're sitting in the for review, unless you set up an automatic rule. So we'll get into those as well. But generally, once we've gotten to this point, nothing's happened. We've just pulled that data down from the bank, and now we're accepting the transactions into QuickBooks. So we're going to go through the for review page, match and add those transactions, and they will move then from the review page to being actually in QuickBooks, in the register, either paired against what was already in the register or just added there. And all those transactions that we reviewed are marked as cleared in the register because we know that they came from the bank. And so then some time may pass, right, and we get a new statement from the bank for the maybe month of December in the case of January here. So once we get that bank statement at the end of a monthly period, we use that to verify that the cleared transactions reflect the bank's record of activity, and we'll walk through the reconciliation process. I'm running on the assumption that the majority of you in the audience are accountant users. Now, some accountants may have invited their clients, but really we kind of advertise this session as being for accountants. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Reconcile process, but we will talk through that just in case and give it some context in QuickBooks Online. All right, I'm looking to see if there's any questions so far. Hopefully this all makes sense. My last piece here is that we would repeat this for each bank or credit card account. So you're not limited to just connecting up one checking account or one credit card. You can connect as many as necessary for the business. I'm sure most of you will have clients that maybe have, 3, 4 accounts depending. Someone is asking if the slides are available to download. They are not. But I will see if there's a way that I can share those at the end here. So thank you for the question. Okay, so let's talk through connecting bank and credit card accounts. And I'm going to kind of bounce between being in the product and using a couple of slides for this. So if I'm on the QuickBooks Online dashboard, I've already connected up some accounts to this client of mine. So on the dashboard, I'll see bank accounts listed. And any that I've already connected are going to show that balance of the bank versus what's in QuickBooks, how many transactions are sitting there waiting for review. So my client has a lot of them. And then the last time it updated. So I updated it shortly before we started this session. Now I can click this pencil if I want to rearrange these accounts to prioritize one over another. I can just hold that down and drag it. That can be helpful. And then if I wanted to connect a new account, I can do it from this home page. Or I can go into banking, and the first time I come into banking, it guides me through forming an initial connection. Otherwise, if I was adding an additional account, I'd click this Add Account button. And that's going to pop up this screen where I can search for a financial institution, so a bank or a credit card company. Tells you some of the popular ones that people connect up with. For the most part, these are what you would expect, bank and credit card companies. There are a few other types of transaction connectors here, like PayPal is a popular one. I'm not going to talk through that kind today. I'm going to focus on traditional bank and credit card accounts. Well, let me do this part with screenshots because it'll be faster that way. So I would search for the website or the bank name. I like using the website because sometimes clients have bank accounts where, the bank gives a very specific website you're supposed to go to sign in, like financial.wellsfargo.whatever.com. And so, if you're not sure which connection to choose when you do a search, using the URL that they use to sign into online banking is really the best tip. And then if you don't find the bank, if I search something here, it'll give you a list of troubleshooting steps. So, make sure you're typing fewer words or actually using that web address. And you can request that we add a bank. So we've got teams that manage our connections with banks, and they look to add additional connections all the time. So you can put in a request for that. But assuming that your client's bank is found, so my client uses Chase, it'll guide you through putting in a user ID and password for the bank account. Now, maybe you have your client's user ID and password. Maybe you want to work alongside them while they're doing this. That would be my preference. If they've given you a special login for their bank, you can try that, although I will say that I have seen where some banks, for security purposes, only want the principal officer to form that initial connection. So it might be something you need to work with your client to get the initial connection going. But the good news is, unless your client, changes their login information, this should be a one-time thing, and then that connection will be ongoing. Now, there is a note here. You might need to perform multi-factor authentication. So a lot of the banks, like any other time you access their website, if you're accessing it from something new, they want you to get a code emailed or called in or text messaged or whatever. And every bank's going to vary a little bit with how they address the security piece here. Now, once we've done that, once we put in the user ID and password, QuickBooks is going to look at all the accounts at that financial institution that it finds under the user ID. So some clients might have, 6 or 7 accounts managed under one user ID, so it'll pull all of those up, and then you would map them against their corresponding account in QuickBooks. Now, maybe they've got a personal account or something that you don't want to connect. If you don't choose an account from the chart of accounts here to connect it up against, it won't connect that account. So it'll only connect the ones that you actually map up. And along the top, there's an important note around importing 90 days worth of transactions by default. And you can choose to bring in a shorter time period. And I recommend basing that on when the account was last reconciled. Because when we pull these transactions in, like we saw in that workflow, we're trying to match or add against things that are already in the register and then reconcile after we're done in the bank feed. So the bank feed is kind of that first leg of reconciliation. And so if the account's already been reconciled, you really don't want to try and bring in transactions from that period if you can avoid it. Now, if you do, or your client does this and there's more than 90 days, there is an option to exclude transactions. So I'll show you how that looks, because maybe I form the connection today and it brings in everything from November and December, but we're already reconciled for 2018. I might grab those transactions and exclude them out and only deal with what's happened so far this year. Likewise, if I do 0 or 7 days, I might have the same thing going on where I just want to address what's relevant to the accounts that haven't been reconciled yet. Somebody asked, is this being recorded for later viewing? It is being recorded. We're going to edit it when it's done and have a link available for it. Okay, the alternative method here is to do a file upload. So if the bank doesn't have a connection, or you want to bring in a very specific date range, so say that 90 days wasn't enough, we want to bring in all of 2017 perhaps. If you can get a file from the bank with the history of transactions in one of these formats, and I know this is kind of small, but the formats are CSV, QFX, QBO, or OFX. If you can get a file in one of those formats, you can upload it in. And I do have a note here, you can use this as a backup method if the bank has connectivity problems, but of course, we'd want you to work with us to report those and troubleshoot and figure out the best course of action. But that's another time you might end up using this method. And I'll show examples of each of these here in just a second. So let's come back out into my bank feed. So along the top, my client's bank feed has couple of accounts connected up, so we're seeing that bank balance versus what's in QuickBooks. These are test accounts, so the numbers are kind of scary, but you get the idea. If I click this pencil icon, I can edit the sign-on info for the bank, or I can edit the account info, and this is what corresponds with the chart of accounts. So it'll show us the category, the detail type, the name, and then it shows that it's connected up. If I did that for one of these accounts, so these other accounts here are file upload accounts. So I don't have a direct connection with the bank, but I have uploaded transactions in the past. So it's going to tell me the last time I did that. It's been a long time for these accounts. And I can click the pencil here and see that it's a file upload account as well. And we always show a balance of 0 for the bank when it's a file upload because we don't actually know that balance in real time like we do for these. This would be that balance as of moments ago. Hopefully that makes sense. The file upload is located here. So I would download the information from my bank. Every bank puts it in a different spot on their website, unfortunately, but you can find that. And then hopefully you'll have it saved locally on your machine, and you can navigate yourself to it and bring in that activity. And then it's going to guide you through mapping that up. So if it's a bank file, you'd map it against the bank account that it needs to be uploaded into. We'll do this one. And for CSV, it's going to guide you through mapping that up against your CSV file. So I have on my other monitor here a file from my client, and it's all their transactions for 2017. And so I've uploaded that, and then I'm just going to look at those Excel columns and match this directly. And I think it's pretty much made the right guesses here. And then it shows me the transactions it's going to import based on the selections I've made. So here's all those transactions. So I have a last opportunity with the CSV to say, you know what, we don't really need to bring in things from December because they're already in the books, or whatever is applicable. But I'm going to bring in all of them. So it's letting me know it's bringing in all this client's activity for last year, and that'll just take a moment because it's a lot of info. But when I say bringing it in, I mean bringing it into the For Review tab. So it hasn't hit the register yet. I'm still going to go through and match or add those transactions. And so now here's my account at the end, and it's gone through those, and it's applied all the rules that I have set up. So I mentioned custom rules. That makes this whole process a lot smoother. And then if I've got anything else that we need to look at, I can address those. And it's easy for me to go through and do that in batch, and I'll talk through that a little bit as we go as well. All right, looking to see if there's any questions. Hopefully I'm going at a good pace for everybody. I want to make sure I leave a good amount of time for a reconciliation here also. So matching and adding transactions. Again, when we pull in the transactions, we look to see if there's a match. So if you've already put something into the books, QuickBooks will recognize this and suggest to match it up to kind of start that reconciliation process and ensure that you don't enter it twice. Those show up as similar records found. So you'll see it kind of tells you how many similar records. So if you've got 2 checks that are very similar, it might say, 2 or 3 similar records found. User rules. So those are the rules that you create. We'll talk about creating rules. You can click Add to approve those transactions. And then there's the QuickBooks rule, and that's what QuickBooks has learned from your past behavior. So again, if I tell it Staples is an office expense one time, it's going to repeat this categorization the next time it comes through. And I can set up a rule to fine-tune that, and we'll look at that in just a second here live. If it doesn't find a match, a rule, or some previous behavior to make a guess off of, it makes an intelligent guess. So if it sees McDonald's, it's going to suggest a travel meal because that's the thing that's in your chart of accounts that we think it might be. And then uncategorized is really where we have no ideas. We don't see any past behavior that could influence this. You don't have a rule set up, and so that's where we can actually go in, categorize the transaction ourselves, and click Add. So let's look at some of these. So on the bank feed, so I can toggle between my cards, so cards along the top to represent each account, and collapse this up to give myself more space. And then I can decide how I want to sort this. So maybe I want to sort it by date, description, payee. I like to look at it by category or match because then I can address the recognized transactions first but I could go off of spent, received as well. In terms of the columns that show up here, I can go to the small gear to make some changes to the settings. So if I want a column for check number to show up, I can click that on. Payee is optional. Editable date field. So this is where you'd actually be able to change this date when you're going through and adding. So maybe you don't want to go off of the date that the bank uses. You want to put in your own date for when the transaction took place. That's what that would enable you to do. Copying the bank detail to memo, that is turned on by default, and I recommend leaving that on, and you'll see why when we get into reconciling. And then show bank details would change this kind of cleaned up QuickBooks description here to the actual bank text of the details that we got from the bank. And this is a little bit ugly to look at, but hey, if you're going through this while also looking at the bank's website or a statement or something, you might prefer that view. Now, even if that's turned off, when we expand a transaction to look at it more closely, that bank detail is still going to be here. So it might be, beneficial to just look at the cleaned up QuickBooks description. Okay, so here are some matches. So when we look at matches, QuickBooks is going to look at payments, sales receipts, deposits, open invoices, and journal entries to see if it can match money spent against those types of transactions. So it'll still look for things like an open invoice that a payment could go against. For money received. So money out, money spent would be bill payments, checks, expenses, open bills, and journal entries. I got myself backwards there. So those are the types of transactions we try to match up against. And again, if it finds more than one thing, we can view that and see, okay, there's two checks that are seemingly identical. Maybe a duplicate was entered. We could take a closer look at that check, have it drop down, and ensure that that's going to be the match, and then match things up. And then, we do the same if it finds one record. It's going to let us know what that is. If I click on it, I can look at that transaction and match that together as well. So I go through my matches, and then next we look at the rules. And I'm going to save rules for the end of our bank feeds part here. So if we don't find a custom rule that's been created, we, again, make an educated guess, and I can review those and make any sort of changes here that I might need. So if I'm looking at this, Woodman's Food, it didn't immediately pick up a payee, so I might enter my payee in. Supplies, it remembered from last time. And usually if you put in a payee last time, it also will populate that. But maybe this is something different this time. And you'll notice as I change the category, it says, all right, we're setting Woodman's Food to travel from now on. So that's QuickBooks remembering and telling you how it's remembering the transaction going forward. I can edit this setting to leave it uncategorized. Maybe every time something comes in from a particular vendor, I want to make that decision or a customer. I'm using expenses as an example mostly, but same things would apply for money in. But I can leave this uncategorized. Maybe it's Amazon or Costco where it's different every time. Or I can create a custom rule to fine-tune the conditions in which QuickBooks Online will categorize it certain ways. So I can decide that. The options here will kind of depend on what you've got turned on in your account and settings under the gear. So if you're using billable expenses, if you're using class and location tracking, I can assign those things as well. This is a customer field. And then again, that copy from the bank detail is going to copy into the memo field unless I turn that off under the small gear in the bank feed. I could also split this transaction if I needed to divide it across different categories or classes or customers, etc. And then we'd add that in based on our selection. And again, if it doesn't find a recognized guess or an intelligent guess here, they'll come through as uncategorized, and we make some decisions around those as we go along, and then it'll remember it for the next time as well. And then we get into these transfers down at the bottom. So transfers have to do with transferring from one bank account to another, like I mentioned, or paying a credit card. So if we scroll up to the top, and look at these bank accounts again. So my client has a checking account and a credit card connected up. And this transaction, or it looks like there's two of them here, is this checking account paying off this credit card? So it's a pretty common scenario, right? And so transferring those. What you end up doing is transferring from one account to the other and then matching that transfer transaction to the other account's bank fees. So I would be transferring this, and usually it picks up on the transfer if the account's connected. So it's this Chase payment and this credit card here. So I'd have the credit card chosen, and then I'd be transferring it and then accepting it on the other side as well. So we'll look at that end to end. Now, sometimes people tell me that they get transactions that come through the bank feed that are marked as transfer, but they're not supposed to be. It's something totally different, and the bank feed thinks it's a transfer. You can switch the radio button to be add, and that'll open up the option to choose a different type of account here. Sometimes you got to kind of click off of it and click back in to get other accounts to show. Here, the expenses up at the top. Because if it's a transfer, it's only going to pull in those balance sheet asset accounts like bank accounts and credit cards to transfer against. I didn't mention find a match, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. So let's say we transfer this, because this is a payment for that credit card. Then we're going to come over to the credit card feed, and I can do this later, but I'm going to show it to you now. Now it actually has matched up the money received, so the money was received from that bank account, to this transfer that I created. So I can look at that end to end and match it up. So I'm matching the money spent against the money received in the other account. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what if we're going through and we know that one of these transactions is already in the bank? So we know that we recorded this gasoline expense already, but QuickBooks is telling us to add it instead. That's an instance where we'd use the Find Match tool. And this will pop down and give us the option to search through recorded transactions and see if there's something that we can pair this up against that it wasn't automatically recognizing. And some of the reasons that it might not automatically recognize is the dollar amount is slightly different. Maybe somebody transposed numbers or forgot to include the change or something when they recorded it. If the dates are dramatically different, or if a different vendor name was used than what it looks like came through the bank feed. So those are some of the reasons that it might not find a match, but for the most part it's pretty smart and it picks those up. But you can use this tool to narrow by types of transactions, to search different date ranges, and it'll see what it can find. Okay, I mentioned before, we pull in a bunch of transactions when we form the initial connection, and maybe some of those have already been reconciled, so we don't want to try and match or add them again. The way to go about handling that would be to exclude transactions. So let me pop over to this account that we've pulled some new information in for. So maybe we brought in an entire year's worth of transactions through a file upload, but we realized, hey, you know what, there was a bunch of stuff from 2016 sitting here and we don't actually need it. I can hold down, and again, use this with caution. I can hold down my shift key when I check one of these off and grab a whole, oops, sorry, I did that wrong, and grab a whole bunch of transactions at once and exclude those out. And that's going to move them into this kind of holding cell area. So if there are duplicates, or you bring in transactions that have already been reconciled, you can exclude those. There might be other reasons you can think of to exclude something. And then I can come into this excluded area and select those from here to permanently delete them out if I want. This can't be recovered, so you want to be very, very sure about this if you're doing some cleanup. And then if there's something sitting in here that you don't want to permanently delete out, you could undo these as well. And then that would put them back into the for review area. So that's something to keep in mind. As the transactions are reviewed and added in, they move to this in QuickBooks spot. So this is the stuff that's actually gone into the books. And we can see that these transactions were added or matched. And we can also see if a rule's applied or not. And I'm going to get into rules in a moment, but I'm going to see if there's any questions around adding or matching. Best practice when there are 3 bank debits and 1 total debit in QBO. So I'm guessing that's where you've got like maybe a payment recorded or a deposit recorded that comes through in the bank feed is individual transactions, or maybe the opposite. So you can, when you're using that find a match tool, and I don't know that I have a great example of this. Let me just click into something here. Let me see. So if this was maybe a combination of payments a payment against like 2 invoices, for example, I could go through the match tool, and I might not have anything that this could pair against. So my data is not going to make a whole lot of sense here. But if this was supposed to be against like 2 transactions, I could select them here and then divide it across. And I might have to do some tweaking of the numbers to pair that. So that's how you could pair 1 transaction from the bank against 2 transactions in QuickBooks. If you've got something that's kind of more complicated than that, it might be that you enter it into the register and then exclude it from the bank feed. Because if you've already got it in the register, you know, if it's a sort of weird situation that it's not finding a match for, that might be a way around it. Just exclude it from the bank feed so you don't end up with a duplicate. Okay, where can we get a copy of this video for other staff to watch? So yeah, we'll, I believe, and I'll double check on this, but I believe I can send the recording out to all attendees after the webinar. Okay, I'm hoping that means that things have been helpful so far. And I'm sorry I didn't stage a transaction to kind of match one up against others. I could take note of who asked that and send you maybe some follow-up details with an example. All right, so let's talk about bank rules. I love the bank rules. So as I mentioned, we did our matches already, and we've got all these transactions marked as rules. So the bank rules are where you fine-tune how QuickBooks will treat the transactions. So QuickBooks is learning from you over time, but it's learning at a very basic level. It's saying, okay, Starbucks is travel meals, Nationwide is insurance, whatever. But maybe we want to fine-tune it and say, hey, if it's these specific conditions, treat it one way, but if it's something else, we want to take a closer look, or we want a different kind of action to happen from that. So the rules allow us to really fine-tune how QuickBooks treats those transactions when they come in and a match isn't found. I'm going to edit an existing rule that I have to kind of walk through an example of this. So when I'm creating a rule, I give the rule a name, however you'd like to organize these. I decide if my rule is going to be for money out or money in, and which bank accounts the rule is going to be applied to. So you might have different conditions depending on the bank account that's used, or maybe you treat everything the same. Along the top, I'm going to set my conditions for QuickBooks. So when QuickBooks scrapes that information from the bank, it's going to look for these details and apply the rule if we fit the conditions. And I can set those to be any or all conditions. So for this example, we're going to say all. And then my next step here is to go by the bank tax description dollar amount. I can use any of these or a combination of them. And in this particular one, I've done a combination of the bank text. So remember, we saw that there's the bank detail, the bank text, and the cleaned up QuickBooks description. So the bank detail tends to give some extra stuff, like it might have the city or the state or a phone number or a payment ID or something like that, a store number to go off of, whereas the description tends to be like one word. So for my client, they've got a storage rental facility, and the bank text says the actual number for the storage unit that they're utilizing. So maybe they have 2, and we create 2 rules, 1 for each unit. I don't know, just throwing out an example. And then I'm also going to go off of the dollar amount. So I wanted to fit all of these conditions. So if the bank text or the description we can contain, doesn't contain, is exactly for dollar amount, equal, greater than, less than, or doesn't equal. So if I know the exact dollar amount that my client gets charged from this life storage rental each month, I might enter that in. And then if QuickBooks finds a transaction that fits those conditions, it's going to follow the actions down here. So in this case, I want QuickBooks, if we find something that fits this, to record this as an expense, assign life storage as the payee, and then I actually have set it to split across 2 different classes by a percentage. You can also split by dollar amount. You can split across categories, and you can split across classes. And if you're splitting across classes, you just want to make sure you put your categories in here as well. It doesn't like it if you leave one of these blank. I get a lot of questions around how many lines you can have. So up here, you can have up to 5 ways that you're looking at conditions. And then you just delete the ones you're not going to use. And then down here, you can actually split this across 20 lines if you wanted to. So we could really take that $66.82 and divide it up a number of ways if we needed to. Class is going to depend, of course, if you've got class turned on in QuickBooks Online Plus, and then location tracking would be the same. And location isn't divided by lines of the transaction. It applies to the whole transaction, so that's why there's only one box for that. And then the last piece is automatically adding to my books. So I can actually automate QuickBooks Online even further by applying these rules and bypassing that review process to add it straight to the books. So use that with caution. Maybe there's nothing else that my client has that would ever come through that looks like this, so I don't need to review it every time. Or maybe I set up a rule that captures like really small transactions. Maybe they're buying gasoline all the time, and I want to just kind of catch that and automatically feed it into the book. So you can decide if you're going to check that box off or not. I recommend, maybe giving the rule itself a try first and then coming back and automating it later, because you can always edit these rules if you need to. So another example might be if you're going off of any. So I have a travel rule set up that if it's any of these conditions, if the bank text has any of these airline names, I'm having us put it in as a travel airline. And because I'm not automatically adding it to my books, I still have a chance before I completely add it in to enter in the payee and enter in the class and location if I want to. So if you leave any of these fields blank in your rule, you can still go through and specify that later. So I can click into one of these that is a rule and fill out the other details if I wanted to assign the class and location at this point. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Unless it's auto add. Then auto add is just going to take what's there and populate it in. And I can see the rules when I go to in QuickBooks, and the ones that have this little icon were an auto add. So my client's got a nationwide expense that we've got just automatically going into the books because it's the same all the time. So I hope those were some valuable examples. We got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to switch us over to reconciliation unless anybody has any questions. If you edit a rule, does QBO apply the edit retroactively to transactions? That is an excellent question. So when I'm in my bank rules, if I edit a rule, it's going to just apply to anything that's sitting there waiting for review. So it's not going to go back to the stuff that's already in the books and make changes to that. So if you change your mind about a rule over time, you can delete one out and it's not going to impact what's already been put into the register. But it will go through the transactions that are sitting there for review and apply the new rule to that or the edit to the rule. I can rearrange these to prioritize one rule over another. And something I love to point out to accountants is there's actually kind of a hidden option here to export the rules out and import them into another company. So I can export them out, and then when I'm in the other client, import the rules that I've created. And I've seen some firms get really inventive and kind of create, hey, this is our standard set of rules that we're going to use for all of our real estate clients, and then they go into their next new real estate client and they put those rules in. And when you import the rules, it guides you through mapping it to their chart of accounts and their customers and vendors and all that good stuff. So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you think, hey, we've got a lot of clients that have really similar activity going on. Okay, very good. And like I mentioned, if I am bringing in a whole year's worth of transactions, it can save me a lot of time when it looks for the matches and then all these rules are applied. So I'm really just, maybe grabbing these and adding them together. And that's another thing you can do. I could sort this by description and then grab like transactions. Again, hold down your shift if you want to grab, one or two or more at once. And then use this batch action to accept them in if you think everything's already filled out, or modify it if you want to assign the payee, category, class, location across those. So these ones are uncategorized. I'd probably do that. I'd go through and put in the payee, the category, the things that make sense. So you can do a lot of this in batch. And I've seen firms that, get a client at tax time that they'd usually be going through a laundry bag of receipts over. They pull in a year's worth of transactions and they just go through and do these batch actions to grab things that are alike and get the data entered in if it's not already in the book. Something to keep in mind. I know it's a bit more involved, but it sure beats keying those in by hand. Okay, let's switch over to reconciliation. So, looking at the questions, seeing if anything's coming through. Hopefully we're still going at a good pace for everybody. So the majority of you are accountant users, so I'm sure you're familiar with the process of reconciling, comparing that monthly bank statement with what you have in QBO. And then, a bank account and the books will agree and are reconciled when the difference between them shows up as $0. So the workflow looks like this. Bank delivers a monthly statement and you retrieve that from your client. Verify all the transactions for the period are accepted. So this is an important step. We talked about how the bank feed is the first leg. So you want to go into the bank feed and make sure nothing for that period is sitting in for review, and then add and match as needed. And then we're going to look at this, resolving discrepancies from the last reconcile if you need to. Hopefully there aren't any, but if you did, QBO is actually going to alert you if there are changes to the last reconcile. And that's something you'd see on your dashboard in QuickBooks Online Accountant, and also something you see when you come into the reconciliation page. And there is a discrepancy report to resolve those. That's something that hasn't always been in QuickBooks Online. We rolled that out last summer, I believe, towards the end of the summer. So we'll take a peek at that when we get into my account. And then, of course, you're entering the statement details, that ending date and balance. A note here is for connected accounts. So the accounts that you've got connected to online banking, you will not have to enter the fees and interest earned, because those are going to be part of that bank feed, right? So you've already added or matched them as you were getting the transactions in. So you won't see a field for that for any connected accounts. And then verify the transactions and complete your reconciliation. So you'll review those. And we know, right, that the transactions that we've added and matched from the bank feed are marked as cleared in the register. So this should be an easy process. Now, of course, in a perfect world, it would match up exactly every time, but everybody's got that client that adds a stray transaction, or, accidentally delete something out or duplicates or whatever. And so, we work through these transactions, and we can use our filtering to narrow the results. And then when the difference reaches 0, we finish our reconcile. If it's a credit card account that you're reconciling, it prompts you, hey, what do you want to do about the bill? And there's some options there to get it paid, or, wait till later. And then review and print the reports if desired. So let's take a peek at this. Okay, so as an accountant, you've got your accountant toolbox, and Reconcile is located here. You can also get to it from the gear menu. So when I come into the reconciliation page, there's a little thing here letting you know that we've made some updates, so you can watch a video around those if you want. And if the bank account that's chosen has a discrepancy, if the beginning balance is off, there's a link here to help you fix it, and that's the reconciliation discrepancy report. So at least one transaction was changed or deleted after it was reconciled. So here are the reasons at a glance of what the discrepancy report is going to pull up. So anything that was changed after it was reconciled that changed the balance of the account, if it was deleted, if it was reconciled in the register or account history by changing the status, like changing the R there, or unreconciled from the register or account history by changing it from an R to a C or to no status. So if anybody made any changes to those letters, that's going to pull up here in the discrepancy report, as well as changing dollar amounts or deleting things out. So you get a quick report of what happened. So here's the date, here's the last time it was changed, reference number if applicable, the payee, what the amount was when it was reconciled, what the rogue client changed it to and they were messing around in their books, the dollar amount difference, if it's still marked as reconciled or not, and then we actually tell you what change type we recognize. So in this case, I am the rogue person who is in the account making some edits. So if we look at the history, it's going to pull up the audit log in another window and show me the audit log filtered down to this transaction. And you guys can tell that I demo a lot. So I've changed this transaction back and forth quite a bit. And we would see the highlight of what changed here. I can click compare to look at those over time and see, okay, this is what it was at 10:56, and this is what it is after Valerie went in and changed that. So you'll get some visibility around that here. And then I can click onto this to change it back. But maybe I need to actually open up the transaction. I could click edit and look at it, call my client, what did you do this for? All of those things can happen, of course, but for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to change it to what I know it should be and save. And then it lets you know, hey, this came from the bank, and we can confirm that if we needed to. So now my discrepancy report has been cleared up, and I'm ready to start my reconcile. And in this case, I've actually gone through and sort of staged this already, so I'm resuming a reconcile. But if I was going in to reconcile one of these other accounts, I'd be entering my ending balance and ending date and starting this up. But I've got a few smoke and mirrors, so I already did that for the sake of time. Okay, so that brings me into the reconciliation window. Across the top, I'll see my bank account that I've chosen, the statement ending date, and then the details broken out as far as the ending balance, the cleared balance, and what makes up those numbers. By default, we're looking at all of the payments and deposits together in one big list, but I can use these menus to divide that out. So if I only want to look at the payments or I only want to look at the deposits, I can see that individually. So that might kind of depend on how your bank statement's laid out, how you want to look at it. So it used to be that we put all of that on one page, and we got a lot of feedback over time that people would like some flexibility around that. What also dividing that out enabled us to do is have more information across the page. So in the last couple months, when we did updates to the reconciliation, we added a column for the cleared date. We added a column for the memo, which I really love because I can actually see those bank details, right? So if we've got those copying from the bank into the memo field, I would see those there. And then this column is how the transaction came in. So the icon here of the kind of two pieces of paper is a manual add from bank feed. And then if there's a plus in front of it, it was an automatic add from the bank feed. So when I hover over these, I kind of see how it came in. Now for this account, all of the transactions came in from the bank feed. So they are all checked off when I come in here because the checkbox indicates that these were cleared. So if they all came from the bank feed and the bank feed is clearing the transactions, then it's all cleared. And in a perfect world, we've got a $0 difference if everything happened that way, right? Kind of as planned. But of course, we know perfect world doesn't always exist. So you might need to take a closer look, right? You still should go through every line of the bank statement and make sure that this is all looking good. Now, if you want, you can uncheck the top box and then go through and check these individually as you go if that's a better workflow for you to verify line by line in the bank statement. And I can sort these columns in different ways as well to match up with the paper in front of me. But I'm just going to check select all because we're doing a demo and I want to keep it quick here. Now, in terms of sort of filtering and looking at that list in different ways, the gear in here is also going to give me the option to edit some columns as well as change the density. So I can look at this super compact or ultra compact if I want to see a lot of lines on the page. That might have something to do with your eyes, how you prefer to look at it. And then filtering. By default, we're filtering by the statement end date. But I could click that X to remove the filter, or I can go into this funnel icon, the filter icon, and really fine-tune the data that I'm looking at. So maybe I want to see all of the transactions, or maybe I want to narrow the date range a bit differently. I can also narrow it down by the cleared status, transaction type, payee, and even use the search to search by the memo field, the reference number, a dollar amount, or a dollar amount greater than or less than. So I can really narrow down how I'm filtering the reconciliation page to solve any problems that I might run into. Now, of course, the goal here as you're going through is to get to that $0 difference. So once you're there, you can finish now, save for later, or close without saving if you really just want to start over. Edit info is going to pull up the option to edit your ending balance and your ending date. So if you match your numbers here, you could go in and make some changes to that if you needed. So I am going to finish now, unless, actually, let me see if there's any questions. Okay, no questions, so hopefully we're going at a good pace. So if I finish now, you've reconciled your account. Oh, and you'll notice, I know I'm in this window, but back behind here next to the gear, you can print out the reconcile before you finish it if you wanted it in this grid format. Maybe you've got some questions to your clients, you want to print it and write some notes or something. So when you've reconciled your account, you can view the report right away, and that'll bring you into the report here, and that is ready to print out as well. And I can get back to this report later by going back into the Reconcile menu and clicking on to the summary or the history by account. So the history by account is going to give you the option to choose a bank account, choose a reporting period. I've got multiple years here, so I can click to expand that. There's the report that we just did, and I can view that from here. As an accountant user, you have the option to undo a reconciliation. So if we made a big mistake and we need to start this one over, I can undo that here. You can only undo them in order. It's important to note. So you want to reconcile the accounts in order. And then if I wanted just a summary, this is a page that shows all of the bank accounts that have been reconciled so far and when that happened, so the statement ending date and when it was last reconciled. So my clients only got 2 accounts that we've actually gone through and done those for, and I can print this or export it into Excel if I'd like. I know some folks have that as part of their engagement to share the reconciliations once they're done in a summary format. What questions do you have? How do checks come into the bank feeds? Oh, that's a great question. So let me backtrack to the bank feed and talk a little bit about checks. So I don't think that my client has any checks, so we might be talking about this kind of at a high level. If we have a column for check number, it kind of depends on the bank, to be honest, whether they're going to actually populate the check number here. So oh, you know what? That one that we brought in all the history for, I think there's some checks in here. Let me sort this and see. Well, maybe not. Hold on. Let me look at this different ways. Okay, here we are. Some check numbers. Oh, I didn't sort them in descending. I was sorting them in ascending. Okay. So if the check number is actually in the bank detail, we tend to pull that out into the check number column. Now, some banks, I don't know why, but some banks don't always pull those details out for us, and that means that it might be in the bank detail, it might not, so it kind of depends on the bank. Hopefully most are actually giving it to us in a format where we can pull that out and put it in the check number field. You'll notice like this one came through as checking and it didn't have the number in the cleaned up QuickBooks description, but it did have it down here. So it kind of depends on the bank how they give us that information to interpret. But hopefully you've got your check number column turned on in the gear to see that. And then if it's not there, look at the bank detail and see. I know that sometimes that can be frustrating if it doesn't show you the details there. So you might decide to match that up against a check that's already been recorded in QuickBooks. If it pulls that match, of course, that's the best way to go about it. But if you're just entering something in, that check number field should still show up here, and then I can choose my my payee in my category and add that transaction in. So that's how we go about handling checks. So similar to expenses. So kind of as a review here, when you're entering transactions, when you're putting them actually into QuickBooks, the difference between expense and check is expense is recording something in it could be a variety of payment methods, right? It could be ACH, a credit card, a debit card, or an actual check that you're just recording. If you record something in as a check, we're assuming that you want to print a check out of QuickBooks. So if you're trying to actually print onto QuickBooks compatible check stock, that's where you want to get your transactions entered. But if you're just recording a check that somebody wrote out of a checkbook elsewhere, you can record that in as an expense, or you can add it in when it comes through the bank feed. If it finds a match from what you've already entered in, that's great. But if it hasn't been entered, you can add it from the bank feed. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. Any last questions? I'm going to put up another poll here, and then at the end I'm going to share some upcoming webinars as well. So I want to know, was this session helpful for you? Did you learn new things? Do you still have questions? Was this completely not what you were expecting and you wish that you got your hour back? Hopefully most of you fall into one of those first two categories. I know this is a busy time of year, so I really appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with me. And I'll give everybody a moment to answer, and then I'm going to copy these links and put them into the chat if they copied and pasted well. Okay, so the majority of you learned new things. That's great. If you still have questions, please get in touch with whoever invited you to attend this webinar today and let them know what else we can help with. Maybe we've got some articles or other videos that we can send to supplement some material. And unfortunately, some of you say that it wasn't what you were expecting. So again, whomever invited you, let us know what your feedback is, because this is actually the first time I've done this type of webinar session, so I'd love to make improvements over time if you have some suggestions. So people want their staff to watch, so I will send a follow-up email with the details of where you can share the link to the webinar. Okay, looks like most of you voted. If you want to give a last-minute feedback on whether this session was helpful, I'd really appreciate that so I can make some adjustments. But okay, I'm going to close out that poll. And then I have sent some, I guess the links didn't send. So this will be part of what we send out afterwards anyhow. So you'll get an email with links to our upcoming webinars. If you found this helpful, you might want to go into a session that deep dives some advanced features of QuickBooks Online Plus. That looks at things like doing inventory management and doing project tracking, those types of pieces of functionality. I'm doing a session on 10 recent updates to QuickBooks Online. And then we have a couple for those of you that are maybe getting started, understanding the benefits of QBO and the Pro Advisor program, and how to convert clients from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. So that is the end here for me. And again, thank you. I know it's hard to take time away in January, so I really appreciate you joining me. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.